I am a mobile bartender in Los Angeles. I work at parties for celebrities, actors, millionaires, and other people who are on the front page. When I say party, many people imagine chaos, drunk people, and dancing until dawn. Sometimes that's the case, but more often it's a mix of haute cuisine, expensive alcohol, heavy perfume, laughter, quiet private conversations, and moments that won't make it into the tabloids. It all started in 2016 when I got a job as a bartender for various catering and mobile bar companies. At first, I worked at ordinary events, where the most star-studded was the wedding of the daughter of the owner of a large car service chain. But then I started getting sent to serve famous people, Maddie LeBlanc, Jeff Bezos, Kate Hudson, and many others. Every year, the list of names in my head grew, and sometimes I was surprised that all this was happening to me. The worst experience was with Sean Penn. He's just a jerk, always rude and aggressive with the staff. I'm tall, 193 centimeters, and I've noticed that sometimes short men immediately start to bully me because of my height. But I didn't expect that from someone of his stature. His manner was as if he was testing you for strength. You put a cocktail in front of him, and he doesn't even look you in the eye, just coldly says, "Is this what I ordered?" And you realize that it's better to just nod than to explain. Another unpleasant incident involved Kardashian's mother, Kris Jenner. It was in 2019 at the birthday party of some famous musician whose name I'm still trying to remember, but the evening was so crazy that the details are blurred. A buffet with super expensive food, top chefs, open seating. Kris arrives with Kim and Kendall, and instead of just sitting down like everyone else, she orders the waiter to have me leave my bar and stand by their table as a bodyguard, letting in only those she approves of. You know, there are moments when you don't even get angry, you just look and think, are you serious? A couple of hours later, she comes up and says that there is a bottle of Belvedere hidden for her in the bar upstairs and asks me to bring it. I said, sure, went, got myself something to eat, and there was a table with such steaks that even I, a person who works with delicacies, stopped and thought, this is the level, came back and poured her Grey Goose instead of Belvedere. She didn't notice the difference. And at that moment, I felt a little like a winner, as if I had just won a small but very personal game. My most pleasant experience was with Kate Hudson. She is as simple, friendly, and down-to-earth as can be. I worked at her home during a Christmas party in Pacific Palisades. It's an area where every house is like something out of a movie, with a view of the ocean, and you can literally smell the sea when the door opens. There were 25 to 30 world-famous stars there. Imagine, you're standing behind the bar, pouring champagne, and next to you are people laughing, people whose faces you've seen in movies, commercials, and magazines since childhood. Paris Hilton had a few drinks and said I was cute. At that moment, I probably could have said something witty, but instead I just smiled, and she smiled back. It was a moment that changed nothing, but I remember it so clearly, as if it happened yesterday. At the end of the party, she was discussing with some famous actor whether to buy some weed. I had a few joints, but they had a strange cheesy taste. I bought them at a new place and regretted it. I didn't dare give them to her. Now I regret it, because it might have been a story I would have told for the rest of my life. A funny story happened with Matt Bomer. While I was making him a cocktail, I said that I always show my hairdresser his photo from the series so that I can get the same haircut. He replied that this hairstyle is very complicated and laughed. We chatted a little more, and then I was fired. They said I was too familiar with the VIP guests. Honestly, I was upset at the time, but now I remember it as a joke. I was fired for a compliment. One of my favorite stories happened at the 2018 New Year's Eve party at Brian Lortz, the head of CAA. I was pouring Casamigos for various guests. Then George Clooney comes up, joking with some rocker that he can't drink, he's just out of rehab. Then Clooney asks for a shot of the same tequila. I pour it, and he says I don't know how to pour, and just takes the bottle. Bartenders are not allowed to give away bottles, but this was George Clooney and his own brand of tequila. He always brings 5 to 6 cases of Casamigos to parties. And it's funny to think that on that night, I poured him probably one of the strongest shots of his life. The most arrogant person turned out to be Orlando Bloom. I was working at Stella McCartney's party at the old Amoeba store on Sunset. Marilyn Manson and Johnny Depp were performing there. The waiters and I were carrying heavy trays to the kitchen, and he was doing a 2-minute photo shoot in the hallway. We just stood there waiting for him to finish, and every second felt like a minute. But the most beautiful woman I have ever seen is Natalie Emmanuel. It was at the Parker Hotel in Palm Springs at a Louis Vuitton party. I was standing with a tray of wine and champagne when she walked in. Everything around me blurred, and I could only see her face. She looked back several times, and I finally apologized for staring and said I couldn't help looking. She replied, "Oh, that's so sweet." And I turned around and went to the kitchen. Sometimes, when I feel old or unattractive, I remember that moment, and it makes me feel better. Because if you were able to impress someone of that caliber for even a few seconds, it means that you too can be part of someone's vivid memory. Many celebrities' taste preferences are not as principled as they would like to show. For example, Kim Kardashian's mother supposedly only drinks Belvedere, but when I poured her Grey Goose, passing it off as Belvedere, she didn't even notice. Matt LeBlanc loves mojitos, and every time he orders one, I feel a quiet sigh echoing in the hearts of every bartender in Los Angeles. Ice, mint, sugar, lime, rum, and so on, 10 times a night. I remember my second time at Bezos' house. His company had just finished filming Manchester by the Sea and threw a huge party. When you walk into a house like that, it feels like you've stepped into an expensive modern art museum, where instead of paintings on the walls, there are ocean views and futuristic installations, and every surface looks like it's been freshly polished. Bezos loves scotch, so in addition to the standard bars, he wanted to have a special tasting station where guests could learn something new. That's where I was assigned. I don't drink myself, but I prepared like a student before a final exam. I printed materials about different regions of Scotland, learned how Islay differs from Speyside, how peat smoke affects the taste. And then, when everything was ready, Ron Swanson approached me. Well, more precisely, the actor who played him, without a mustache and with his wife. I think, here it is, my moment of glory. He looks at the collection, takes a glass, and says, "Can I have some water?" "Water?" I ask, trying to hide my confusion. "Yes, to open up the scotch," he replies calmly. I pour him water with a smile, laughing inside, "Thanks, Ron, for destroying all my theatrical training in 1 second." Bezos is really obsessed with scotch. He has bottles ranging from $40 to $8,000. He asks about each one, what is the aging period? What region is it from? And then I realize that if I hadn't studied the material, I would have looked like a complete idiot. The most expensive bottle that evening was 44 years old, and I still can't repeat the name without stumbling. And, of course, I accidentally poured myself a little into a washed-out tonic bottle, so it wouldn't go to waste. Honestly, that sip of scotch was like a little piece of history, smooth, smoky, with an aftertaste that lingered on my tongue for a minute. There was an even more absurd moment, at the afterparty after Coachella. One guy, with whom we were constantly joking around, asked me for some tequila. The bottles were free, no one was keeping track. And I jokingly said to him, "Bring me a bag and you'll get a bottle." He smiled. "If I had a bag, I would have given it to you anyway." We repeated this conversation several times until I realized that he thought I was asking him for a bag of cocaine. In fact, I meant a regular plastic bag to carry the bottle. I laughed like a schoolboy who accidentally found himself at an adult party where everyone speaks their own code. In Los Angeles, appearance is your ticket. My looks definitely helped me get into certain places, but it was only my charisma, ability to speak, and confidence that allowed me to stay there. Many people here hire staff based on how they look on camera, even if no one will publish any photos from the party. There is one multimillionaire whom I remember particularly fondly, Mike, the owner of a huge real estate empire. He is over 50, but he has remained a simple man. After the Super Bowl, he threw parties for hundreds of guests with a budget of $50,000 for alcohol alone. Once, after the event, we were throwing a ball to each other in the yard, and his girlfriend yelled at us like we were schoolchildren. He has a wine cellar and a tasting room in his basement. He showed me a $25 bottle with a label that said, "So fucking good," and asked if I got the joke. Once he offered me some rare tequila, but I refused. I think he was a little disappointed. Now I wouldn't hesitate. The smallest tip was $0. The largest was from a producer at Crustacean in Beverly Hills, 7 shots of Hennessy Parody, each costing $250, and a $1,700 tip for 2 minutes. We split it between 4 of us, but it was still a substantial amount. I remember Leonardo DiCaprio standing next to me for half an hour at a party, talking to an elderly woman. I tried to act cool until Katy Perry, who had had a few drinks, started dancing on the table and Orlando Bloom filmed her on his phone. It was a night when Elon Musk, Grimes, Paris Hilton, Dua Lipa, and a dozen other stars were all in the same room, and it all seemed unreal. After that night, the company that hired me didn't pay me $1,000. I wrote to Kate Hudson's assistant, and she personally made sure the money was returned. Sometimes I think that could have been the peak of my career. But who knows, in Los Angeles, the next story is always just around the corner. Luxury does not always mean that the party will be cool. I worked at the home of the daughter of the owner of Formula One, a huge mansion in Beverly Hills, worth probably more than the entire neighborhood combined. White marble walls, a swimming pool with water illuminated so that it seems to glow from within, and a terrace overlooking the whole of Los Angeles. There were 18 bedrooms, each the size of an average apartment. But despite this, the atmosphere was cold. People sat in small groups, talking quietly, and it felt like they had come more to be seen than to relax. Another thing was the wedding of the daughter of the inventor of Hot Pockets. You may not realize it, but this simple, frozen food made their family millionaires. The wedding was like something out of a movie, an open-air dance floor, live music, tables laden with delicacies that even the most discerning guests took 2 servings of. There was no pretentiousness here, everyone laughed and danced, and even the groom walked around with a glass of beer and joked with the staff. At moments like these, you feel that even among the super rich, there are people who know how to have a good time. One of the coolest parties I've worked at was Matty LeBlanc's 50th birthday bash. When you walk into his garage, it feels like you've walked into a Porsche museum, 3 rooms, each decorated to represent different eras of the brand, 8 or 9 cars, collectible merchandise, old posters, even mechanics' uniforms. And then there's the wine cellar and a safe that looks like it could hold not only money but also a couple of cars. The most interesting thing is that despite all this, the furniture in the house was old-fashioned, as if from 2005. Maybe he just doesn't like to change the interior, or maybe there are some sentimental reasons. But Brian Lord, the head of CAA, had everything in the style of maximum luxury. A 30-seat home theater, a bar where every bottle of alcohol cost more than my monthly salary, and a courtyard where you could hold a wedding for 200 guests. That evening, I was working behind the central bar and saw the faces of so many famous actors that my head was spinning. Some ordered champagne at $600 a bottle, others ordered a simple Coke with ice. And what's interesting is that sometimes those who are considered gods turn out to be simple and friendly, while secondary stars can behave as if you have to bow to them for every sip they take. The craziest moment was probably in 2019, when Cardi B gave Offset $500,000 in cash. Part of it, $25,000, was in $1 bills so he could throw them around in a strip club. Then they came to my bar, and I literally couldn't see the floor, it was covered with banknotes. They were brand new, thick, and the whole room smelled like wet cardboard. Cardi also ordered him a pyramid of 500 Popeyes chicken sandwiches. At that time, they were hard to come by in the city, but she found them anyway. It was a giant mountain that smelled so delicious that even guests in tuxedos secretly came up to take one. Among the musicians, I remember that Dua Lipa drinks margaritas. She came to one party in a simple black dress without any extra glitz, and she is very modest in real life. No star airs and graces. Katy Perry, on the other hand, loves to dance on tables. A couple of glasses of wine, and she's already laughing, making silly movements, and the guests around her are applauding. Paris Hilton, whom I already mentioned, once leaned over to me and, swaying slightly, said, "You're cute." It was at a party where she herself looked like she had just stepped out of an advertising poster. Even before Tanner L became famous, we met at a private party. She was with friends, and we crossed paths several times at the bar. The conversation somehow turned into flirting, but I didn't dare ask for her number at the time. Now I think I should have. I can't help but mention pets. Once, Mark Pellegrino came to the set with his old blind dog. He held her in his arms, fed her water from a bottle, and I caught myself thinking, here it is, the contrast of Hollywood. On screen he plays tough guys, but in real life he tenderly cares for an old animal. Despite the fact that I constantly work around alcohol, I haven't drunk since I was 18. It started when a friend of mine said, "Alcohol ruins your brain." I was young and easily influenced at the time, so I just decided to give it up. At 27, I started smoking weed, but I still think it's less harmful to me than alcohol could be. I never put celebrities on a pedestal. If I approach them, it's the same way I would approach my friend's older brother, with respect, but without unnecessary pomp. Sometimes a light, casual conversation makes a bigger impression on them than enthusiastic exclamations. There were moments when I caught myself thinking that if I had been a little bolder, the stories would have continued. For example, that evening at the Parker Hotel when Natalie Emmanuel looked back at me 3 times. Or the time when Dua Lipa held my gaze longer than necessary, and I could have said something. But perhaps it is these little what-ifs that make me go back to work, knowing that next time everything could be different. Over the years, I have come to understand one thing: the greatest value of this profession is not even money, nor the chance to take a photo with someone famous. It is the opportunity to find yourself in places you would never otherwise get to. To see the world from the inside, to hear conversations that will never leave these walls, and to observe people whom the whole world sees only through the prism of edited interviews. There are parties where you walk in and immediately feel that you're going to have fun. The buzz of voices, music, smells, someone brought a bouquet of fresh roses, someone else spilled perfume, and everything mixed in the air, the light aroma of champagne, cigar smoke, and something sweet, like fresh croissants. The guests are laughing, some are already dancing, even the bartenders are singing along to the music. And then there are other parties where everything is different: silence, tension, everyone sizing each other up with their eyes. In places like this, you realize that you have to be careful with every word, because someone might take a joke as an insult. Once I was invited to a private party in Malibu. The house stood right above the ocean, and when the glass doors of the terrace opened, you could hear the waves crashing against the rocks. Inside, the lighting was subdued, the bar was illuminated by golden lamps, and a jazz quartet was playing in the corner. At first, it was quiet, and I was just pouring champagne and light cocktails until Elon Musk, Grimes, and a few other people entered the room. I expected them to come up to the bar, but they stopped 2 meters away, and Elon started telling some story about a rocket launch. It was strange to hear it not on the news, but as part of a live conversation, with him laughing, waving his arms, and imitating the sound of engines. Woohoo! Of course, I wasn't eavesdropping on purpose, but you can't help but hear when they're standing so close. Then someone in his group ordered water with ice. At moments like this, you realize that even the richest people can be simple in their desires. At another party after the movie premiere, everything was the opposite. Katy Perry, Johnny Depp, Jared Leto, and half of Hollywood were there. The air smelled of expensive whiskey and truffles. I was standing behind the bar when an actor, whose name I don't want to mention, came up to me and said, "A real martini isn't made like that." He took the shaker from me, poured in twice as much gin as needed, mixed it, and proudly placed it in front of me. "That's how it's done." I just smiled and said, "Now I know the secret," and thought, yeah, the secret is to make a cocktail that will make you lose your legs. There were also moments when guests just wanted to have fun. Once, Johnny Knoxville came up to me, leaned over, and whispered, "Add a little more rum, but don't tell anyone." I nodded and did as he asked, and he left me his standard $20 tip. His 20s are almost legendary. Whether he orders one drink or five, the tip is always the same. Sometimes there were small but warm gestures from guests. Once, a famous actress, noticing that I had been standing without a break for several hours, said to her assistant, "Bring him something to eat." A minute later, a plate of salmon and mini burgers was placed in front of me. Such small things are more memorable than large tips. But there were also opposite situations. Some guests ordered the most expensive drinks, drank them, and left without even looking in my direction. At first, it was annoying, but over time I realized that I shouldn't take it personally. For some, it's a habit, for others, it's a principle, and some just don't think about the staff. What struck me most was how differently celebrities treat staff. Kate Hudson always smiles, asks how things are going, and can joke around. Orlando Bloom doesn't even look you in the eye when he walks by. Jeff Bezos was genuinely interested in my stories about Scotch, while Sean Penn pretended I wasn't even there. Over the years, I have become calmer when meeting famous people. If at first I was impressed by the fact that I was standing in front of an actor from Titanic or a musician whose songs I listened to in school, now I see them as just people. People whose work makes them public figures, but not necessarily special in personal communication. And yet, sometimes I catch myself thinking, if I had said something wittier to Natalie Emmanuel than "hello" and "bye," maybe this story would have had a sequel. Or if I had approached Dua Lipa and simply thanked her for the music I listened to on my headphones on the way to work. But perhaps it is these little what-ifs that make me go to my next shift thinking that the next party could be the most interesting one in my life. Because you never know who will be on the other side of the bar. Sometimes it can be a person who will give you a tiny moment that will stay with you forever. And for that moment, I'm still here. When I look back on all those years behind the bar at celebrity parties, it seems to me that it was a mixture of cinema, comedy, and social experiment. Some moments were so bright that I caught myself thinking, how did I even get here? Others were so awkward that I just wanted to disappear into the shadows of the bar. I saw Cardi B turn $500,000 into a show with bills and a pyramid of sandwiches. I remember the moment she walked up to my bar, the floor littered with dollar bills, and I could literally feel them sticking to the soles of my shoes. The room smelled of fresh paint and wet cardboard, the distinctive scent of new bills. Guests dressed in designer suits quietly bent down to pick up a few dollars and exchanged conspiratorial glances. I saw George Clooney, already quite drunk, take a bottle of his own tequila from my hands, laugh, and say, "You're not pouring enough, buddy." In moments like these, you suddenly realize that you are not looking at a Hollywood icon, but simply a man who wants to drink and joke around. I remember Paris Hilton leaning over to me and saying that I was cute. It was said so casually, as if we had known each other for years, but at the same time, I clearly understood that we were on different planets. And still, it was nice. Because in a job where you mostly serve and listen, sometimes you want to hear something personal. I remember when Maddie LeBlanc ordered a mojito, and I smiled and quietly cursed in my head because it's one of those cocktails that requires a lot of fuss. Ice, mint, lime, sugar, and so on. But he ordered them with such sincerity that you couldn't refuse him. Or how Kardashian's mother asked me to stand guard at their table so that no one else would sit down. Then she drank Grey Goose, thinking it was Belvedere, and didn't even realize that I had substituted the alcohol. A small victory for the bartender in the battle against pretentiousness. And Orlando Bloom. I can still see him blocking the passage to the kitchen, staging a photo shoot right in front of us while we stood there with heavy trays. It lasted 2 minutes, but it seemed like an eternity. And, of course, Natalie Emanuel. The same party in Palm Springs. I'm standing there with my tray, and suddenly everything around me blurs. Her face, the light falling on her cheeks, the look she gave me as she walked by. She looked back several times, and each glance hit me harder than any criticism or praise. I approached her, apologized for staring, said I couldn't take my eyes off her, and just went to the kitchen. Sometimes, when I feel exhausted, I remember that moment. Because if you can impress someone of that caliber for even a few seconds, it means you too can remain in someone's memory. I remember Jeff Bezos listening intently to my stories about Scotch. As we discussed the regions of Scotland, he asked questions as if he wanted to learn more, not just keep the conversation going. The most expensive bottle that evening cost so much that you could buy an old but working car for that money. And yes, I tried it, accidentally, of course. I remember multi-billionaire Mike showing me his wine cellar and laughing at a $25 label, so fucking good. He could spend tens of thousands on a party, but he treated me like a friend. I remember Johnny Knoxville with his steady 20s. And how he once winked and said, "Just a little more rum, but don't tell anyone." There were evenings when I saw half of Hollywood in one room. And moments when I stood in silence, waiting for someone to approach. There were nights when people known to the whole world laughed, got drunk, danced, forgot about the cameras, and I saw them as no one else sees them. This job taught me not to idolize them. And at the same time, to appreciate those small, sometimes random moments that later become the most precious memories. If I weren't a bartender, I would never have stories about Elon Musk joking 2 meters away from me, Katy Perry dancing on a table, or Dua Lipa ordering a margarita, shyly averting her eyes. Maybe one day I'll leave this job. But when that happens, I'll know that I had the chance to peek behind the scenes of the lives of those who most people only see on screen. And the most valuable thing I've learned from this is not money or connections, but the realization that behind the glitz and glamour there are always ordinary people. It's just that some of them always have room for one more cocktail at the bar.